Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Erica Austin. I am with Dogwise, and I am joined today by my dear friend and one of our esteemed authors, Tim Lewis, to talk about his book, Biology of Dogs. I have taken some notes. I have some questions. So I am so excited to be talking to you today, Tim. And people who are joining in live, either on Facebook or YouTube, we invite you to leave comments, ask questions. This should be a discussion that is open to everybody. So if you have questions about Tim's book, about biology, about dog behavior, leave us a comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from. But we're very excited to have this talk today. So hi, Tim. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. It's always a joy to talk with you, Erica, and always a joy to talk about my book. And dogs especially.
And dogs. I mean, what better can you get? Dogs and books and talking with friends about it. It's absolutely the best.
It is.
One thing I wanted to talk about with this interview today was that I wanted to talk a little bit, Tim, about your audiobook. So we did have your book come out as an audiobook last year. It has been downloaded hundreds of times, lots of people listening to it. The thing that I love most about Tim's audiobook, and the thing that our listeners will love most about Tim's audiobook, is that Tim narrated it. So most of the time when we have an audiobook, I've been in charge of this process since we started doing audiobooks with Dogwise, we actually hire a professional voice narrator to read the book. And we can run into some snags there, like some people don't know how to pronounce the words, or they're not dog people and they don't really get the concept. But especially for a book like this book just has so much of your personality written into the page, but being able to hear you read it's like having you in the room reading your own book. It's just been so great. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of that experience of recording the book and how that went? Was it worth it to you?
Yeah, I'll first illustrate one of the challenges of reading your own writing for an audiobook. I was reading a sentence over and over. I must have read it 10 times and got it wrong each time. And it was an important sentence, because everything you say is important. And I stopped and I said, and that would be an expletive that may or may not be deletable, would write a sentence like this. And the sound crew, which was 3 people, just burst out laughing. Pretty much ended the session for about 45 minutes. That process of doing the audiobook, I would read a chapter that I was going to record that day. And the sound studio was at the university I'm with, the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. That sound crew, there would be a person who would set me up, microphones, all that. I was in a little soundproof room, and with my book in its PDF format, for one you had sent me, and I would just be scrolling through. And the advantage of that is there's no sound of page turning. There's no getting stuck. There's no accidentally flipping 2 pages. And these little technical things you don't really think of until you start recording. So I'm sitting there in a soundproof room all by myself. It means no one's going to laugh at anything that's funny. Nobody's going to say, hey, what? Which is a little weird, because when you give a talk, you're reading your audience. You're watching their face. You're looking for acknowledgement. When I'm teaching a class, I'm watching, are my students with me? When you're reading the book, it's into a quiet void. And it was nice because I would come out of a session and the sound crew would there'd be a lead person and oftentimes a sound editor who was doing some editing on the fly. And they would edit things like, I would read a sentence and get it wrong, and you'd just go, I'm going to redo that. And that would be their marker. Stop, go back, cut it here, and to the next one. But you'd be getting no feedback as you go along. And after a little while, you kind of get into the rhythm. I actually did like the first 3 chapters, and then I went back and redid them because I had finally gotten it. And I actually did that when I was writing too. I wrote the first 3 chapters, and people were like, you're starting to get into your voice. I went back and rewrote those. And so you just have this reading, and frankly, it got to be really enjoyable. I just went, yeah, this was a work for me, a new way of approaching things. And I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the process of recording it. And I'm writing another book, and I'm going to record it for you.
Fantastic. I cannot wait. More on that later, people who are tuning in. I think it's interesting having, again, started trying to get the Dogwise books on Audible in the last year and a half or so. It's been a learning process for me too. And listening to, like I said, different narrators and how they read and kind of do they get the voice and do they understand the concepts? And most people who listen to audiobooks know a good narrator or a bad narrator, it can make or break the book. I mean, I know people who have listened to audiobooks and been like, I just can't listen to this anymore, even though I really want to hear what it has to say. Like, it's not an enjoyable voice. And whenever I'm searching for audiobooks, I usually try and pick ones that are read by the authors. So I'm so glad that we had you do that for us and that we kind of did that experiment. I've had people say like, well, why don't you just read the audiobooks for Dogwise? You know how to pronounce everything. I can tell you right now, I set up a microphone. I got a like at-home recording studio, sat down, read 5 pages on a PDF and was like, I hate this. This is so hard. You know, I've had a couple, there are 3 other Dogwise authors who have said, I want to read my own book. And all of them have started and been like, this is a lot harder than we thought it would be. And that's why they have professional voice actors out there who, you know, who do these narrations. But it is such a gift to have had your audiobook. So I did want to say for people who are tuning in, speaking of audiobooks, we are doing a contest. So if you tune in and you leave us a comment or you ask us a question, you will be entered to win a free copy of Tim's audiobook. Unfortunately, this is only US and UK. But if you're in the US or UK and you want a free copy of Tim's audiobook, ask a question of Tim and you'll be entered to win. I was listening to the audiobook on my phone as I was getting ready for our interview yesterday and today, and I skipped ahead to a random section and started listening to Tour 9 and also ended up in Tour 10 because I was like, oh, I'll just listen to a few minutes. And then like 2 hours later, I was like, I know so much about the brain. This is great. I do recommend you start at the beginning, but one thing for Audible listeners is there's actually a button at the bottom where you can make a clip, kind of like a bookmark. And then I was able to go in this morning and see all of the clips that I had made in through the timeline so that I could go in. And then I was able to go and annotate it in my book and say, oh yeah, that was something that I wanted to ask Tim more about. So we've got some questions, but if you all have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments for us. So let's kind of get started. Tim, I've got a couple of quotes that I pulled up for us to talk about. So this quote does need a little bit of context. When I just kind of pulled it out, I thought, are we going to understand it if we're talking about it? Because before this, in the audiobook and the book, you're talking about how genetics are some of the mom, some of the dad. If you think about taking out pages from the mom and pages from the dad and putting them together in a book, and then you're going to toss out one page or the other so that it's a pretty good mix, we think, of genetic traits. So in this quote, you're talking about how humans have thrown out pages or parts of these volumes of books that didn't work for us as humans, and not necessarily what didn't work for the dogs. So this is in a chapter that's talking a little bit about selective like breeding and avoiding inbreeding and things like that. But can you talk a little bit about why this biology, why this genetics matters to us as animal professionals?
Absolutely. And I'll also add, I wish I had put a sentence in there that the wolves were doing their own editing as well.
Oh, very good point. Yeah.
Because there's self-selection going on. All natural selection is all about traits that work, and work means make copies of yourself, get passed on, and traits that don't work traits that work get passed on, and traits that don't work are retained. Did I say that right? Let me try that one more time. Traits that work are kept, traits that don't work tossed out. And the tossed out is by death, right? The individuals with that bad trait just don't do as well as the ones with better traits, and the only measure is doing well. Why it matters is, first of all, you don't get to start a new page from scratch. People will say things like, well, why didn't dogs develop, let's be absurd, wings? No vertebrate besides birds and bats have developed wings. And and some dinosaurs. But they all did that by modifying existing parts, right? Modified hands or modified arms. They didn't just get Pegasus wings growing out of the back. Knowing that this comes from volumes handed down from ancestors and the pages selected by people or by natural selection by the wolves who are better able to interact with people, sets limits on what we can get out of a dog. The whole point of this quote is our domestic dogs are a subset of wolves. They're not more than wolves. They're not less than wolves. And every wolf is a subset of the big wolf genome. You are a subset of the human genome. Every individual is a selected subset. And the domestic dogs, if there are 40 million dogs, there are 40 million subsets of that selected. So it sets boundaries. We're not going to just develop a flying dog. But less absurd than the flying dog is there are some nutritional limits, for example. Knowing that some breeds have more amylase, which digests starches, than others means you don't get a one-size-fits-all answer on what's the best diet for a dog. Why not? Because genetics matter. Individual dogs have individual immune systems programmed in part by their genetics and in part by their environmental encounters. And my dog does this doesn't mean your dog is going to do that. So it helps us understand some of those differences and why they matter. It's not all programming. It's not all environment. I'll be talking again this fall at the Aggression Conference, which actually is going to be much bigger than that now. It's going to involve other groups. But one of the issues I try and bring home is this question about why is my dog aggressive, for example. It's partly genetics and it's partly experience, and both can make a dog aggressive. Diagnosing the wrong problem or the wrong source gives you a wrong solution or an unworkable solution. There are different breeds with different genetics. There are individuals with different individual experiences, and knowing how those play in on your dog will help you understand why it's an individual thing. And I'll just do a quick analogy to when I go to the doctor. When I go to the doctor doesn't look and say, hey, Tim, an average guy your age will have this blood pressure, this sugar problem, and needs this medicine. Here you go, goodbye. They have to check me individually. Averages are really wonderful understanding groups. They're terrible at understanding individuals. You still have to check the individual. So part of this is also saying every dog is unique. And we can talk about averages, but I still got to know my dog with its set, with its combination, why that matters.
Well, and that is actually kind of brings me to my next question. My next quote was when you're talking a bit about individuality, I think something that happens that I've seen a lot in the dog training world, and it does become something that becomes confrontational, is this idea of the training method that you're applying. Well, that might not work for my dog because my dog is fill in the blank. And then you hear the blanks are labels of stubborn or a certain breed or a certain whatever, and there's such a fine line between this train the dog in front of you and learning theory is applying to all of the living organisms that we know of so far. So kind of this idea of that individual in front of you that you're working with, but also the overall concept as well of there is something going on a general level as a group, as a species, as mammals or as organisms that matters. In this quote, you're talking about, you give a really great example of, or a really great brief definition of positive reinforcement, negative punishment, operant conditioning. And you say, while this model worked really well for B.F. Skinner, we know it's more complex than he suggested. And rewarding a behavior works well most of the time, but when it doesn't, knowing what else might be going on is important. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. First, I will say that the best explanation of that I've ever heard came from a webinar that Kathy Murphy did on thinking outside the boxes. And it's thinking outside the Skinner boxes, not literally the Skinner box he trained animals in, but the 4 quadrants we set up with the kind of reinforcements And we think that that's it for the way dogs learn. And if I just get the right reinforcement, or I figure out what is reinforcing to my dog, that is a large part of the picture, right? My dog's food motivated, my dog's more voice motivated. Those are all still fitting into the Skinner boxes about what reinforces, but not everything learned is about reinforcement. Your dog is watching, and some dogs are more overt about this, but they learn by seeing. Many mammals do this, probably all, but it's really dangerous as a scientist to say anything is all or never. But we have eyes, and the brain takes in information, and it doesn't always store it the way you think it does. In fact, it rarely stores it the way you think it does. And there's other learning going on. So my dog is sensing different parts of the world than I am, but also learning by different means. There's some intrinsic learning, some innate learning that you get from genetics. You just come wired with some of those behaviors. There's things that are observed. Your dog also thinks. There are original thoughts in your dog. They figure things out. I'll give an example just from yesterday, practicing nose work with our dogs. We the scent was on one side of a pretty large curved couch, and both of my dogs were running through the. My wife had set up the hide, but the dogs were coming in from this side to the couch and put their nose under the couch, and both dogs, there was a pause and a run around and go to the other side and pick the scent up again. I didn't teach him to run around a couch, and a dog that doesn't think would try to crawl under the couch to get to the scent, or would signal, hey, it's inaccessible. This is as close as I get. And both dogs independently got there, stood back, which I anthropomorphize being think about it, but it sure seems, and then just ran around the other side, picked up the scent again, and went on their merry way. And the scent was, in fact, another 4 feet beyond the couch. They figure things out. They're learning things new in their brain, not just what you teach them. It's not all learned from teaching. There's that I generated the knowledge myself. And then there's just weird things the brain does, brain chemistry, that aren't really reinforced by some treat or some attaboy, but rather physiologically reinforced because it worked. So the learning scope is much broader, and the one you as a trainer would have best control over are these Skinner behavior ones. But Skinner's idea was that it's all learned, and we can make any brain do anything because it's all plastic, and it's plastic in the flexible mindset, and that's wrong. There are some things that can't be unlearned because they're genetic. There are some things that can be layered over and kind of controlled. There are some things that are being thought of new by your dog. It's more complicated. Partly give yourself a little slack, partly embrace that there's more going on than just you, and give your dog some freedom to learn. But granted, the most powerful tools at your fingertips are behavior rewards.
Yeah. As you're talking about that, a couple of things are coming to mind. One thing, have you read this book by Claudia Fugaza, Do As I Do? So this is a new second edition of her book she came out with several years ago, maybe 10 years ago, the original version, but this is a second edition. This book is all about social learning. So it teaches you how to teach your dog how to do something by modeling it. Like you teach your dog this cue of, when I do this thing, then you do it with the corresponding body part. Essentially, if I touch it with my hand, you would touch it with your paw. But there's also a whole section about like dogs can't pick things up with their paws, so they're going to use their mouths. It's really fascinating. Mm-hmm. But her research that she's been doing for the last several years is really fascinating stuff. And you were talking about like how are dogs learning? And this is one of those examples of way outside the Skinner box. I mean, not way outside the Skinner box. There is some reinforcement going on there as well. But the social learning aspect that we now do have research that dogs can learn just by watching other dogs, by watching humans. It's really fascinating stuff. But as you were talking about the like this idea of Skinner saying like any brain can be taught to do anything. Like, yeah, that is a little bit kind of minimizing how the like how the brains work, and then different brain chemistry, and maybe, like you said, some things that are genetic that can't be unlearned or can't be taught maybe. And that's really fascinating to think about.
Well, and you can think about yourself, not you in particular, anyone here. Do you always do what you think you wanted to be doing? Do you always act and say exactly what you learned was the right thing to say? No, there's a lot going on in your brain that you don't have this conscious you don't have direct control over. And it can be a little scary at times.
Yeah, that is a really good point. You know, I try really hard, and of course it's the new year, so we're all setting our resolutions and trying to be better humans, right? Of like, I'm not going to watch TV or just doom scroll through Instagram or Facebook all night long. I'm going to sit down and read a book. And I mean, I read books for a living, but I'm going to read not like a fiction book for fun. Palate cleanser from all my nonfiction books that I read during the day. But there are days where I just am like, I'm going to read a book, and I sit down on the couch with the book, and there I am on Instagram, and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, this isn't even what I wanted. I got the whole antecedent arrangement set up, and I'm still not doing what I should or wanted or even intended to be doing. And that actually, when you were saying, you know, there's some things sometimes that go on internally, we have heard about like intrinsic motivation or something that an animal would do that just has kind of an internal feel good as opposed to an external reward. And that's something that I think about as well with our dogs, of not just competing motivators, but also what is going on inside and how we can't exactly prove it, right? We don't know what they're thinking. We can prove it. Say more.
So have you heard me talk about 5 brains before?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. There's plenty of evidence for several of those brains and implied evidence for others that are competing inside you for control at various times. That's not some psychological, you've got 5 personalities and there are biologically developed independent brains that are functioning that we all lump as one brain, me, the conscious brain. But if me, the conscious brain, were really the one me, every New Year's resolution, I love your example, every New Year's resolution would be easy peasy. We wouldn't even have to make them. We could make them in March and we would just do them. We don't. Last night, I pulled out from the freezer what I was going to have for lunch today, and I saw a piece of coffee cake that I make amazingly good coffee cake, and this was my mother-in-law's recipe. Oh, so amazing! And I saw it, and I'm like, I am having that for breakfast tomorrow morning. And 5 minutes later, it was gone. And part of my brain's like, wait, you want that tomorrow? My brain took control, and I ate it right away. We do that all the time. And that's because eating is far more fundamental than most of this high-level thinking. And it evolved way before high-level thinking. And we like to think this high-level thinking is in charge. And it ain't. It can be. We evolved this higher-level thinking because it allows us to modify our genetic inclinations. It allows us to adapt to a changing environment. This is what it does. This is what a brain does for animals. Is it gives you a chance to. If genetics were fine all by itself, we wouldn't have brains. We'd just do everything genetically programmed and be done. And there are plenty of animals that do that. There are plenty of plants that do that. Right? It's a very, very successful strategy. Our brains evolved in part to allow us to modify the environment based on the environment to learn. And the higher brain seems to have evolved in a large part to be a predictive machine, not only to react to my environment, but to predict what my environment's gonna be. We didn't evolve to read, fly airplanes, drive cars, play pickleball, write computer programming. That's all sidelight stuff where we've hijacked tools evolved to do something else to be very productive things.
Which, bringing us back to dogs, is something that when we were talking about kind of selective breeding for, you know, you and I are both border collie fanatics, and those dogs were definitely bred to do something very specific. But thinking about the application of things like nose work or medical alert dogs or things like that, like those dogs' noses were not evolved to, that we know of, detect cancer or a drop in blood sugar for a diabetic, but this is something that we've been able to harness and use. We have a couple of questions that I want to bring up. I will say that it sounds like we need that coffee cake recipe. But Mallory wants to know, what started your studies in this area and how did you first become curious about this, about biology and specifically biology in dogs? I know that you didn't start out with dogs, but can you tell everyone who's listening?
Yeah, I did not start out with dogs. I'm a wildlife biologist by training. I was very interested in predator-prey relationships by the time I was looking to go to graduate school, and was very interested in white-tailed deer. And the predator in the area that I was interested in was coyotes, or coyotes, depending on what part of the country you're from. And so I got interested in that, but I wasn't interested in dogs per se, except as this predator on deer. And I mean, my interest in biology goes back as far as I can remember. I couldn't understand why anybody wanted to learn anything else, because it was either the environment or your body. What else is there? Everything falls into that. But when I got to graduate school, I was really interested in white-tailed deer and looking at population dynamics and migration of animals. And then I switched to turtles when I started being a college professor, because they're a lot less dangerous, mostly, the right species, than deer, and easier for students to literally get their hands on. I spent most of my career studying and publishing about turtles. I got interested in dogs first when a dog, Beaker, showed up at our house, and it probably was abandoned on the road. We lived out in the country. And he moved in. Like, we tried to, here's a little food, now go away. Didn't know anything. Like, here's a little food reward. You might have
You accidentally trained him to stay at your house,
right? How often we do that, right? I didn't think that was going to be a reward. Well, it turns out it was a reward for the dog. Food should have been. I just didn't, I was a college professor. I didn't think about using food as a reward. You don't do that in a classroom. You can, and I have. So that got me interested. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm living with this other species, and he's doing things that I didn't think another. And you right away start saying, is he thinking? Is he? And to any of us who have dogs, we're like, well, of course he is. But in the scientific community, I was raised in the mindset of anything non-human doesn't think, doesn't feel, blah, blah, blah. And functional MRIs come along and we discover, oh, their brains all work pretty much the same. This was really, I watched how fascinated I was by dogs and how much it motivated my learning. So I then thought, wow, I could trick students who don't like biology. And it was that conniving. Everybody loves dogs. And I'll develop a course. And in this case, the idea for the course, I laid it out. And then a friend of mine who loves horses, she was like, well, we could do horses too. And I'm like, that's perfect. You get a predator and a prey, and you can teach every concept in biology. So we called it the Dog and Pony Show, and we co-taught this great course. And we took students and we put dogs in front of them and horses in front of them. And the common comment was things like, you tricked me into loving biology. I was like, bingo.
I 100% feel that way about your book. Like, I'm like, yeah, I took biology in high school and I get it. But like, I was listening to it when I was driving yesterday and was like, I know how the eye works, Tim. Skip this part. And then you said something and I've got a question about that in a minute. Okay. I was like, wait, what? I didn't know that's how the eye worked. And then I was like, skip back 30 seconds, listen to it again. Like, hold on a minute. And it is. And I think that engaging style that you have, and just easy to talk to and listen to, and like, how can you apply it to make it interesting? So it sounds like it worked.
Well, it works for learning, but I've also had tons of people who've listened to my talks or read the book say, this got me a better relationship with my dog. This helped me understand things that I could apply to training or health, made me approach a veterinarian differently because now I'm an active thinker about what this drug's going to do to my dog or what this technique might do to my dog. And that's the win, that dogs get better lives. Frankly, this is going to sound really bad, but people interest me less than dogs do. If my books and my talks get dogs better lives, I win. I've made a contribution to the world. to the dog world, because those dogs, they love us no matter how stupid we are. They hang with us no matter how dumb we are and bad a trainer we are. And I think they deserve a little bit better life. So it's not just interesting science, which is enough for me. That motivates me. It's interesting. I'll learn it. This actually gives your dog a better life. It gives you a better life with your dog to understand that. That goes to something you had mentioned, I think before we started, about you can drive a car and not know how it works, and that's fine. But if you know how it works, there's so much more you can do, and you'll be quicker to notice a problem that needs attention before it becomes a catastrophe. You're driving your car and you hear a noise coming out of the back left, and you go, my car's making a noise. Drive. And in fact, it's a bearing failing, and a bearing failing can ultimately, worst case scenario, lead to a wheel falling off and rolling off into the distance. And if you knew how the car worked, you'd go, that sound should be checked out. It could be a bearing. And if you don't know how it works, you go, that's another new noise for my car. Let's just keep going. It's the same thing with your dog. If you understand how your dog works, you'll be more attuned, you'll be a better observer, but you'll also be up on more health-related things. You'll find new ways to motivate your dog. You'll watch more closely. You'll discover something, in my case, like nose work, that the dog just loves so much. How could I not let him do it? Your dog might not love nose work. Don't do it. Don't make them do something they don't want to do. And you start to see how that plays into a better life for the dogs.
There's a pretty early on in the introduction on like page 5, there's this comparison picture. I wanted to be able to get it up on the screen earlier and I just ran out of time, but I couldn't share everything I wanted to. So everybody go buy the book. But this example of like, here's how you see your dog before you read the book. And then here's how you see your dog after you read the book. And for those of us following on social media, I'm going to be posting about this in the next couple of days, but all of the things that you're going to observe, including this little one right here that says this dog is breathing 14 times per minute, sleeping, not dead. I really liked that because maybe at first glance you're like, what is this a picture of? And I think you're right. And something that you say very early on in the book is, and we shared it on our social media yesterday, you say, be forewarned, you will learn a lot about yourself too, because humans really aren't that different from dogs. And I think that that's something, of course we kind of like know that, but understanding biologically how we're similar can give us a lot more empathy for our animal learners as well. So it's such a great resource. We do have a question coming in from Nikki, who's in Canada.
Hi, Nikki.
Tim, if you could only pick one idea from your book, what do you think would help dog trainers and behavior consultants the most, and why? An easy question from our friend Nikki.
Yeah, right. Wow. I guess the one thought I would want you to have is the one, Erica, that you just brought up, that your dog really isn't that different from you. I can talk a little bit in detail about how their brain difference probably makes them think differently based on what we know about the brain and what we've studied. But they're a lot like us. They want to be happy. They feel emotions. They connect very well with us, and we're important to them. They're not movable art. They're not just something that happens to be with us. They're living, breathing, self-aware organisms that want a good life. And a good life to a dog isn't necessarily the same as a good life to you, but these things matter. And if you remember that about your dog, I would caution you not to obsess about it, but I do. And probably we all do to some extent, that it's a living, breathing, thinking partner. I'm a little leery of partner. We all want to be just co-equals with our dogs, but your brain thinks differently than your dog's. You took your dog into the house without its consent because it couldn't cognitively consent to what that meant. And we make decisions for our dog every day, like it or not. So it's not an even up relationship. Partner makes me feel like my dog should go to work and earn some of the money for the household. But that they're a lot more than a mosquito or a fly. They're so much richer in there. And if people had that in mind, then they would go get motivated to learn more things about the dog in general.
It's a great point. We do have a question from Ingrid, who is asking about this book that Tim hasn't read yet, but I'm going to send him a copy of so he can read it. The Do As I Do book that is talking about social learning, saying is working with mirror neurons in this book. Now, I don't know anything about mirror neurons, but that sounds, I heard the word neurons in your book, in your audiobook a lot. So do you know, what can you tell us about mirror neurons? And then I just remembered I have a question about a mirror, not a neuron.
It's interesting. I read a book 2 weeks ago about human brains. I'd never heard of mirror neurons till that book. I read it and went, I got to go learn more about those. I haven't. So I can't.
We'll get back to you, Ingrid.
To be honest, I've made a note that now I got to go add those to the book that I'm working on. If it's, I would hate to speculate.
All right, we'll get back to you on that, Ingrid. Next time we do an interview, we'll find out about that. Unrelated to mirror neurons at all, in the book, and I couldn't find the page. I was listening to it the other day and clipped it, but then didn't find the quote to put it up. But you talked about how self-identification with dogs and some of the experiments that people do with, or that scientists have done with mostly primates, but I happen to know that they've done it with dolphins as well.
And elephants.
And elephants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this can an animal recognize itself? First of all, can you kind of describe that experiment? And then also, why does it not work for dogs? And do we have any evidence that dogs can self-identify maybe in another way?
So the idea,
I think we might have gotten a bad internet.
You're breaking up all of a sudden.
Oh, okay. We might be back, hopefully. Can you tell us about that mirror experiment a little bit?
Sure. So the challenge, trying to know, do you know yourself, right? We have defined consciousness to be, can I recognize that the rest of the world is not me and that it responds to me? And it's something infants go through in their psychological development, where they become aware that they may think they're the center of the universe, but there is a universe. It's not all them. And that this face looking at me is not me. And eventually predicting what does that thing that's not me think about and do, and become this, what we define as self-aware. We're primates, we're very visual. So we defined it right away with, can you visually recognize that that thing is a reflection of you and not still another of the same species? That's not, even by itself, there are plenty of scientists who say that doesn't really measure self-awareness. And those who say it does say, well, you got anything better? And not really, except what I'm going to talk about with dogs. But it's really hard to know. How can I know, Erica, that you're not a figment of my imagination or just a reflection of my thinking, and that you operate independently? And more importantly, how do I know that that reflection of me that I see on the screen is not another Tim Lewis, right? And you go, well, it's easy because he's doing exactly what I'm doing. That's not proof. But what we did was we set this up, and what they do is I like the elephant version since you didn't mention it. They put a spot on the side of an elephant's forehead, and the elephant looks in the mirror, sees the spot, and uses its own trunk to touch it. Well, that means it knows the reflection is not another elephant. It's not going to tell another elephant, hey, you got a spot on your forehead. Let me touch my forehead right where it is. And you can actually test that by putting spots on other elephants' foreheads. And if the normal elephant greeting isn't, hey, you got a spot there, it's nothing. But when it's me in a mirror and I start picking at it, that tells me I know that thing I'm seeing is me, and not, because it's a different reaction than if it was just another one in the crowd. Dogs are visual. They can see. They do a lot of things. It's not their primary form of recognition. Their primary form of recognition is olfactory, smell. And when they devised a test using smell, dogs could tell the difference between self and others. So the mirror wasn't a good tool for self-identification for a dog, because that visual isn't as important for identifying the other as it is for us. We're very visual, and visual responses clue in on us. And it should get you thinking about, well, then how would we test if an earthworm is self-aware? They're not visual, they don't have eyes. Now, I don't think there's enough brain power there, but nobody really cares what Tim Lewis thinks on that. How would you even measure that? If an alien showed up, what would be your measure that they were self-aware? I'm not altogether convinced how much it matters. It matters to me, but you should treat other animals as well as you can. I want you to be respectful of trees, for crying out loud. And we don't think they have a nervous system at all. No evidence for it. But recognizing that, stop being so speciesist. This is how I would recognize self. How might something else recognize it? And when they did that, they found that dogs were pretty self-aware. And none of us who have dogs are very surprised about that.
That does seem to be the case pretty often, is that scientists discover something that people with dogs are like, yeah, we probably could have guessed that one just by observing the learners in our own home, right?
I'm a white male. We were trained in so many male-specific ways. This is how the human responds to this drug. It was only tested on men. This is the way you should respond to issues of power and structure and career. And a lot of those were built on reinforcing who I happen to be. I'm not sorry for who I am, but you have to be aware that you couldn't live in today's world and not be aware that that is a focus of a lot of people. But you have to learn to think like someone else or something else and project that. So like right now, Trooper is at my feet, curled up, sleeping. Probably not because he's trying to be quiet during an interview, but probably because he's bored and like, oh, Tim's just sitting at his desk again. Anyway, it's that. So that self-test required somebody to try and think like a dog and take in the world the way a dog would.
So I've got speaking of kind of putting ourselves in the shoes of someone else, I've got a pop quiz for our audience. So feel free to drop in the comments. This is not how many colors are in this crayon box. This is how many colors exist in the world. As there's a section in your book where you're talking about humans as visual, as opposed to dogs who their sense of smell is much stronger than ours. So any guesses on how many colors there are, people who want to comment and drop a comment in, we would like to hear what you think. Because in the book, you are talking about how it's in tour 10. So the book is organized by tours. You're taking a tour of the nervous system, or chapter 10, tour 10 is a guided tour of inputs to the brain. And in the section where you're talking about chemoreception for taste and smell, you say that humans have maybe 500 types of chemoreceptors and dogs are understood to have 1,000, although some scientists say there are 20,000 different types. But there's not a complete agreement on how to spot or how different receptors has to be counted as distinct. But you decided in the book to use color to clarify, since most of us have that sense. And you said we're rather poorly attuned to our sense of smells as humans, which I think is true compared to dogs. So how many colors are there? And I love, there's some good, this feels like a trick question. Ingrid says millions. Mallory says 3 or 0. This feels like a trick question. Good guesses. So in the book.
Can I jump in and just comment?
Yeah,
I went both directions on that. I was like, is she looking for the millions or is she looking for the trick part? And I'd love this question.
Good question. So in the book, you say 3, the primary colors of red, blue, and yellow, and all others derive from them. So how many derivative colors? And I say 64 because that's what my box of Crayola crayons had when I was in school. But now they come into boxes of up to 124, and your computer monitor has 256. And so here we go, is looking at all these different senses, the way that we sense the world and how dogs are taking information in as well.
And I'm going to jump in and take Mallory's 0 and say there are none. Also, we have 3 different kinds of receptors, but in the end, each receptor simply makes an action potential, which sends a chemoelectric signal down a neuron, and somewhere in the brain, it's got to go, well, it's an identical signal coming no matter what color it is, which receptor, but your brain knows what receptor it came from and assigns it, which then means all color is really seen in your brain, and they are all just simple sodium channel action potentials coming in.
In fact, I had that quote pulled up and ready to talk about. Thanks for leading us in there, Tim. So there is another part of this book that says an eye is simply converting photons of light to action potentials in neurons for your brain, which sounds very sciencey and confusing. And then you say, to be clear, you see with your brain, not your eyes. So go ahead and tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so every sense, and you have sensory receptors all over your body, temperature, pressure, sound, sight, just bunches, intrinsic ones like your proprioception, your sense of where your body positions are, your sense of time, and all these signals coming in constantly to your brain. But ultimately, they all come in as action potentials. And we don't, mind you, I can describe at a neuron level what's going on. I can describe at whole brain structure what's going on, and we're missing the key middle part, right? We don't know, well, how does a neuron that's got 10,000 inputs coming to it fire under these conditions and not under these conditions? And how does the brain then convert that to our view of the world, right? So all of this is just little cells firing in your brain, and ultimately your brain is encased in a dark space, and the only input it's getting from the outside world are these little neurons firing that now get mapped into your brain, and your brain then projects. So it is really easy to devise optical illusions that you can objectively know are one thing, but your brain sees something else. And magicians, for example, use this all of the time to get your brain to see what's expected, not what's unexpected. When people say something like, that car came out of nowhere and hit me from the side, they mean it because their brain was making them see what's there, what's there, what's there, what's there. Oh shit, this is important. It's now crossing my field of view. It just got priority. It appeared out of nowhere. It's decisions your brain is making about what to pay attention to. In my talks, I usually go to shoes. 30 years ago, I picked shoes, and now I'm stuck with it. You're sitting there, you weren't thinking about the shoes you're wearing. I happen to be barefoot right now, just in my socks. But I wasn't thinking about that. But those signals were coming in from my feet the whole time, and my brain was just ignoring them. And I asked it to pay attention, and now it's paying attention. Your brain, particularly the amygdala, is making immediate decisions about what to pay attention to. The amygdala is actually plural. There's two of them. Making immediate decisions. Is this a threat? Is this a major food opportunity? Is this a major sex opportunity? And those get wired. Those go straight to being dealt with. And other things go up to your higher brain functions, which take longer to process. But it's all about processing. When I say something like coffee cake, and that's all I say, we all think of something different. Our brain pictures our own experiences with coffee. It could be good, it could be bad, it could be, oh my God, it's coffee, I don't want anything to do with it. And we all experience it differently. We can smell different coffee cakes we've encountered in our life. We can remember really good ones and really bad ones. And yes, my mother-in-law's recipe is amazingly good. And you're talking to a connoisseur who likes as a hobby to cook coffee cake. So it's all just action potentials. The pain you feel when you burn your hand because you were so stupid yesterday to grab the cast iron skillet that you just took out of the oven with a pot holder, and then you grabbed it with your bare hands. Yes, I did that. And that pain, which I could not ignore, is coming in as a same kind of action potential as the sound of the heater over there. And my brain has to decide what it pays attention to. It assigns meanings based on previous experience. That's a threat. That's not a threat. And then it colors it so you see what you expect. And over time, for example, partners become more attractive than they were objectively when you first met them. if it's a positive relationship, and they become less attractive because if it's a negative relationship, because your brain is assigning all kinds of meaning. You are seeing with your brain. Everything you sense is ultimately your brain or one of your 5 brains processing. Okay, well, actually, your spinal cord does some processing too. It's actually one of your brains. It's part
you can't just keep adding brains, Tim.
Well, it's not an additional, it's part of the hindbrain. We just do a cutoff. This is so down a different path. We cut off and go, your brain is everything up here in the skull, yet there is learning that goes on in your spinal cord. It is simply an extension of the brainstem, which is inside your skull. And we just draw a line and go, outside the skull, it's a spinal cord, but it's really your hindbrain continued. And there is learning that goes on there. There's learning, and it manages, for example, your walking. Your cerebellum is for major coordination, but your day-to-day rhythmic walking, it's all handled down in the spinal cord.
I have a philosophical question here from Ingrid. We're getting very philosophical today about the colors that we see. And Ingrid says, this is the question of, do we all see colors the same? Do you perceive green the way that I see green? And we think about how our brain is the thing that sees. This is a really great point, a really good thing to think about.
And I'm going to give the lame scientific answer. We don't know. It doesn't really matter. The answer is there are pools of scientists who say absolutely we all see green the same way because it's the same wavelengths of light firing a neuron. We're all wired pretty much the same. As your brain is developing, those photoreceptors in your eye are reinforcing a neural tract to a very specific part of your brain, and the color parts get perceived in the same areas of mammalian brains. So we must see them the same way. And then there's the other school of thought of scientists who are actively studying this, who say there's zero chance we all see it the same way because how you perceive it, this shade, this hue, we all see something and label it the same way, green, but green to me looks very different than green to you. And the argument there is, well, some people like the color green. It's probably looking prettier. And some people don't like the color green, and it's not a learned thing. It's because they see it differently. And I don't like this color and I like that color. The colors you like might really be showing up in your brain the way the colors I like are showing up, but they're associated with different wavelengths. I don't know. I think, honestly, I don't think we do see them the same way. Zero science behind it, and I don't know how we could ever get it. We would all agree that thing right there is green, but what that looked like in our brains, it would have to be different. There's some basis in reality, but the fact is, Erica, you don't look the same to me as you look to other people because I'm in friendship with you and I associate that with you. There's more to it. And in fact, plenty of evidence that for example, with your face, I see the face that on average I see with you. And unless you did something really dramatic, I'm not even going to see the difference. There have been times in my life where I shaved my beard off and people will look at me and they'll go, something's different. New glasses? Because that's not how the brain doesn't work by just studying every detail every day. It paints a picture. That's Tim's face. Well, there's Tim's face. Something's different. I don't know what it is. It literally happens that way. We see things differently. We just go, something's different. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I love the question. I love thinking about that one, but it gets me nowhere because there's zero way with any technology we currently can even imagine that we'd be able to tell. God help us if we get a good scientist who thinks of some way to do it. That'd be fascinating.
Speaking of perceiving things the same way, something that you wrote in the book says most of what you think of as taste is actually smell, and the two pretty much work the same. So in that same chapter where you're talking about chemoreceptors, when I was listening to this, the first thing I thought, and you had described the different ways that your dogs eat food. One of them is just scarfing it down, and the other one's gonna, look at it and smell it and lick it and take their time. And this quote really made me think about how we think about dogs' sense of taste as not as refined as ours as humans, probably because of all of the gross, disgusting things that they eat, and also how fast they tend to eat. Like they're just inhaling their food. And as I'm listening and thinking about this, I'm like, yeah, my dog just scarfs down his meal every day. Even if I put it in a slow feeder puzzle or enrichment items or whatever, it's just eat it as fast as I can. I gave him a bite of steak the other day. It did not even touch his tongue, went straight down his throat, right? And I was thinking, but dogs have such a quote unquote better sense of smell than us. So does this work the same way for dogs, that taste and smell are the same? Do we know? Can you talk about this a little bit?
Sure. So let's first think evolutionarily, what's the function of taste? It's really to protect your digestive system. It picks up really basic things, poisons. It evolved to keep you from eating the wrong things and to encourage you to eat the things that are scarce and you need to seek out. Salt, for example. Out in the wild, salt's pretty scarce, unless you live in Utah. So you have strong taste drive to put things in your mouth that are salty, potato chips, stuff like that, because it fits a really basic survival need. Protect your gullet from poisoning. Bitter, you have to learn to like bitter. You weren't born liking coffee and beer. You learn it. And many people are like, well, why would you want to learn to drink something that's got alkaloids and could be poisonous? I support you on that. Perfect logic. You have to learn to ignore some of those flavors or to retrain your brain to make those good. Right. So I drink a beer now on a hot day after mowing the lawn. I'm like, nothing tastes better. I did teach my brain that. And that's partly that we all perceive the world a little differently because there's learning associated with it. And we can override some of those things. Smell has a very different function. Action at a distance, find mates, find food, find danger. And it's far more refined. The things that get into my mouth to taste are already very close. And it's a last line of defense. And smell is for what's further away. What does this attract me to? How does this help? And you can tell smell and taste are different because when you get a cold, what you lose is your sense of smell, not your sense of taste. Everything you still get when you have a cold, and why chicken soup tastes so good, because it's got a lot of salt. Your body loves salt. Those basic tastes are still there, but you lose the whole array of smell because your sinuses are swollen and they're not getting the smells to it. So they function differently and they go to different parts of the brain. You can trace the nerves and where the nerves go in the brain. And you can test what functions and how nuanced they are. And so we'll say dogs don't have quite as much of a flavor palette for us. It's important. They are omnivores and most of their diet is okay for them. They don't experiment with foods from all over the world. They experiment with foods that are in their area. And dogs also have a very quick vomit reflex, which also affects the digestive system. So what they didn't taste, you're a predator. You don't want to spend a lot of time dining. You want to get on with your life and maybe go find more prey or get out of the way of being somebody else's prey. They have a really refined set of taste buds down the esophagus that continue the function of the tongue. And it's why they regurgitate so easily. We evolved more as plant eaters, but omnivores still. So our vomit reflex is nowhere near as sensitive as theirs. And they don't need to taste it going down because they're going to be tasting it. We go, they didn't taste it. They tasted it the whole way down the esophagus. And you might think that steak was wasted, but that steak got tasted the whole way down. Plus, your dog has probably learned you don't feed it poison. So it's also going to be a little less cautious about that. That your dog will sit down, it makes sense.
Yeah. And that makes sense too, especially hearing you talk about, the bitter foods. I have a toddler who I'm working really hard to train her to eat bitter foods like broccoli. But our dogs are being sensitive to medication and all of the tricks that we do to wrap it in deli meat or smother it in peanut butter or get a pill pocket. And the thing that, because you said what you said just now about like your dog knows you're probably not going to give him poison. I love the trick of like, I'll be preparing food. I've got his like heartworm medication on the counter and I'm preparing food and I just knock it onto the floor and I go, oops. And he runs over and gobbles it up. I'm like, haha, tricked you. Because like you said, he knows I'm not going to feed him poison, but if I wrap that in peanut butter, he will run and hide under the bed and be like, oh, there's something there. I'm not going to like how it tastes.
And I'm going to give a caution to my own interpretation, which is shorthand and easy to do. But it implies that dogs work the same way we do. My dog probably doesn't have a concept of poison, right? We have a much more complex brain and we think about poison. My dog knows you've never given me anything that made me sick and might not even think that sophisticatedly about it. Might just be, it's always been a good experience when you give me something.
Absolutely. I think that, and again, that's a really good, so something that I heard someone lecture about years ago was theory of mind and layers of theory of mind of, I know this about my dog. Like, I know that I'm holding 3 treats. Does my dog know that I'm holding 3 treats? Do I know I'm holding 3 treats? And that's a complicated, we don't know how far that theory of mind goes. Pat Miller just released a book. It is actually going to be coming out at the end of this month called Discovering the World of Canine Cognition. And she talks about theory of mind and how dogs think, and not just how dogs are perceiving the world, but how they're learning and how to improve their cognitive abilities. And that's actually small Dogwise plug that is available for pre-order on Dogwise as of yesterday. So if you want to know more about how dogs think and how dogs learn, check out that new book. We've got a question from Mallory about the cover of your book and the design of this book. Mallory says, I've got to know, as an avid Doyle fan, what's the motivation behind the Sherlock-esque cover? What does it mean to you to be the Sherlock Holmes of dog biology, Tim?
It was, it's, the symbolism was obviously intended. The use of a dog on a dog book, obviously intended, but the idea that you need to be curious about your dog and you need to investigate your dog. And by the way, the fine writing behind all that is actually the introduction to the book.
I thought it was. Yeah, I was looking at that earlier.
You can read the introduction to the book right off the cover. And spoiler alert, the choice of colors for the cover was deliberate because dogs see blue and yellow best. They're dichromatic. And I chose it. So there's all these little, I would call them Easter eggs, right? I think that's the right words. That all these little Easter eggs I buried in there, partly for me, just because they were fun. In this case, it's because I want you to be a sleuth about your dog. I want you to be an active detective and look for clues. I talk about in the book taking measurements and watching breath rates and looking at heart rates and really paying attention to the details. You read Sherlock Holmes or Agatha Christie or any of these, or go watch the Knives Out movies. You got to watch the little tiny details to get the story right. I want you to be that active, clever detective about your dog. And that's why Sherlock Holmes. And my friend Brad Palm actually did the drawing for it. He did all the little drawings on the chapters in between. And each drawing is in the chapters is a little symbolic thing associated with it in some way that either struck him or struck me as important. So those are all very deliberate, thought out inclusions. Because
I actually noticed that when I was flipping through yesterday, and I had not noticed that it was a magnifying glass, but I think because it's the only thing on the page, I had just, skipped past it.
Right over.
It's such a great example of the circulatory system, and inside of the magnifying glass, there's a little heart. So very good. Yeah. The Easter eggs. I knew the cover was blue and yellow. I put up the screen so people could see it a little more closely, but I did not think about how, I know that those are the colors that dogs see the best, but I didn't think about that. What an intentionally good choice you've got there, Tim. I like it. I like it a lot. As we are wrapping up, I want to invite anyone who is tuning in that if you have read the book, please go to dogwise.com and leave, of course, 5 stars of this book. There is no other rating that's appropriate, in my opinion. Reviews of books, especially on our website, really help other readers to figure out what book they want to read next, or if this is a book that's going to be interesting to them. So if you have read this book, we do encourage you to leave a review. If you haven't read the book, that is okay, because we have a exclusive coupon code for you. You'll see it down here at the bottom, where you can actually save 20% on dogwise.com with the code FBLive20. So if you haven't read the book and you want to read the book, we're giving that coupon code to anyone who's tuning in today. And then, as I mentioned before, we do have, this book is now available on audio. And like I said, Tim reads the book. So if you want to get more of Tim, I want to say the entire audiobook is like 10 hours or something like that. I can't remember, but you probably remember, you had to record it. It's a lot.
Yeah, but recording was there's probably 2 or 3 hours for every hour of recorded, because you go back and repeat things, or you stop and you catch your breath and you.
Recording is definitely harder than we think, but it is in fact almost 11 hours long. So if you want to have 11 hours of Tim in the car with you when you're driving to your dog training sessions, or when you're doing the dishes or doing your chores, and you're like, you know what, I think I want to learn something today, but make it fun, then Tim's audiobook is definitely the answer for you. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today, and everyone who tuned in, thank you very much, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you for your time.